now like to introduce our speaker, Ross Reid, the creative force behind the social media sensation Nerdy About Nature. Born to settler immigrants from Denmark, Norway, and the UK, Ross Reid grew up in the Cascade foothills on the traditional lands of various Coast Salish and Nuchutlu nations. Surrounded by nature, he developed a deep love for the outdoors, spending his youth skiing, biking, hiking, and surfing. Despite diverse pursuits, including studies in biology and film production, his fascination with nature persisted. In 2019, he founded Nerdy About Nature, blending his passion for communication, ecology, and philosophy to inspire others to appreciate and protect the natural world. Ross believes that shared knowledge fosters a collective love for our planet, driving positive change for future generations. And you can learn more at nerdyaboutnature.com. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Ross for his presentation.
Oh man. Hello everybody. Where am I? Am I live?
You're live.
Um, Thanks for that lovely introduction. Really appreciate that. That was very well said. I don't know if I wrote that or what happened, where you got that from. For those of you who are unaware, my name is Ross Reid. I um from Washington State and Puyallup Nation lands. Currently reside out in Ucluelet on Ucluelet and Tloquit lands. So the Nacholneth nations there. Um, I have recently, long story short, we were supposed to do this presentation a while ago. We had to postpone it because I ran for political, some ran for MLA in my riding. On Vancouver Island, unsuccessfully, but it was a great experience. But I was taking some time off and I was just down in the Redwoods because I had never been to the Redwoods before. I don't know how I managed to not do that until now. So I'm just on my way back. I'm passing through my parents' house right now. Um, and I haven't had a chance. I've just had computer issues and I haven't had a chance to fully dive into this presentation here. But I'm sending Camille the link right now. I just sent that to you.
I just got
Okay, cool. You have you, the people of the internet, now have my 100% unbridled attention.
it.
So yeah, Nerdy About Nature has been a really fun, a really fun project for me to kind of embark on. I'll talk about it here. Yes, there we are. Using social media to educate and engage. Um, so I'm a millennial. I'm an elder millennial, I would call myself. I never really had any aspirations of any kind to become a social media influencer, but it is kind of an interesting just thing that I've fallen into through a bunch of different life experiences, which I'm going to share with you all here. And it's kind of grown into, I feel like a really unique thing that gives me an ability to really feel like I'm contributing to doing good in the world, which is a great feeling. I think we're in an era right now where there's just kind of a general lack of education and awareness about the way that our worlds work. And so being able to use social media as a tool to kind of educate people on this in a fun and engaging way is a pretty interesting opportunity, a pretty cool thing that I feel like is a really great opportunity in this kind of cutting edge technology, this day and age that we live in, for better, for worse. As I mentioned in the past, like I never set out to be an influencer. It's just kind of something that I've like fallen into, and even that word feels dirty to me to use, but it's just the nature of the business, I guess we're in. Camille, you can go to the next slide, please. So I reside in the Cascadian bioregion. Bioregionality is kind of an interesting thing that for whatever reason never really took off, but it's basically looking at ways that the ecosystems, the lands that you live on are all kind of interconnected. So the heart of the Cascadian bioregion is basically the Columbia River watershed. So that's everything from southern British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and bits of Montana. So anywhere where rain falls in that area, it all eventually drains out to the Columbia. as well as up along the coastline, the Salish Sea between Washington and Vancouver Island, and then down the coast to California. And all of this is kind of united in similar biodiversity, like biological, geographical kind of similarities that kind of unite this region. And I find it to be a really good way to kind of look at this world, especially because like the arbitrary lines created between Canada and United States, then the states and provinces, like it's all just silly lines drawn by humans, right? And I think focusing on this kind of broader bioregional scale gives us a chance to like look at the broader interconnections of our world. So that's really kind of what I like to focus on. Again, I was born in Washington State on Puyallup lands. I now reside up in British Columbia. I'm fortunate enough to be a dual citizen. Um, and I was really, blessed to begin my life in Washington in a family that loved the outdoors. So I was dragged kicking and screaming for the longest time out, out into the mountains, learning how to ski at an age when I didn't appreciate it. My dad kind of forced that on me. And then biking, hiking, doing things with family. So it was like a really great way to grow up. Like engaged in the outdoors at a very young age, and before I knew it, that just was the life that I was leading. And that kind of ended up bringing me to when it came time to go to school through for college. I didn't really focus on I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was going to go to school for business because it seemed like the right thing to do. It seemed like what everybody was doing. And then I ended up switching gears literally a month before school started and going to school in Montana in Bozeman for film studies and film production because I was just kind of into creative storytelling. I had like um, an old high-8 video camera, and me and my friends used to film jackass videos and things like that, as you do, skate and ski movies. And so I went to school in Montana for film, learned a lot about communications and storytelling, but again, was still very involved in the outdoors. Like I think, my graduating. The year that I graduated, my senior year in college, I think I skied like 138 days that year, which is a significant chunk of time and still graduated like not top of my class but like mid-range, like so I was like outdoors playing a lot, and then that led me to pursue a career in outdoor filmmaking. So I got into making ski films right out of the bat out of college, and I did that for a solid decade, working with some incredible athletes, incredible companies, incredible places, going to some amazing places all over the world. And at this kind of stage in my life, I started just kind of being more curious about the world around me. So I would go to some place and then I would like pick up a book about the area while I was there and start reading books on trees and forests and just was kind of like picking up all this knowledge. When I went to school in Bozeman, I also did a minor in biology, but I didn't pursue that just because I was kind of triggered from high school experiences with physics and math. So that kind of stopped me from going into anything really hardcore in the sciences realm. And I just kind of focused on the creative storytelling aspect of that. And then at some point, I also went to school in Australia to get an MBA, focused on surfing for a bit, did some surf films, and lived down in Australia for a couple years. And then I came back up to North America back in 2015 and have just kind of focused on making ski movies and things like that. And then if we can go to the next slide. Um, and these ski movies, this outdoor filmmaking kind of career really brought me to some amazing places. And again, I just kept reading about it and learning about it and was just really interested in the biology side of things and the ecology side of things, but not having that formal background just because of the way schooling was. It just, yeah, I have really deep traumas around math. Even now, if I were to like having to, calculate the tip on a bill in front of other people is borderline the most terrifying thing for me to do. I hate it. So that kept me from going into any of the sciences. And as a result, I kind of ended up starting this nerdy about nature thing as a joke because I had just amassed all this knowledge, all this understanding through different ways of getting it, not your kind of average schooling route. Just again, like lots of books and just entertaining reading and David Attenborough documentaries, things like that. And then I would be going out on a hike or a ski tour with friends, and I would just be rambling about some incredible cedar that we just passed. And I would just be dumping all these fun facts on them. And they were eventually just like, oh my God, dude, like, shut up. You are driving us nuts. You need to start like an Instagram account or something to have some sort of outlet. So I began Nerdy About Nature, December 2019. And it just honestly started as a joke. Yeah, just kind of sharing fun facts when I would like be going out skiing and like little tidbits like that. And then of course we had the pandemic, March 2020. So at that point, all my film work dried up, and the government was basically giving us what, $500 a month was it to just hang out, and like giving me money to just make goofy videos. So then I really started focusing on that a little bit more. Um, and then we can go to the next slide here, actually. If you want. And then that just kind of has eventually led to some pretty incredible, unexpected growth. We had the Ferry Creek blockades was a big part of it. I think Ferry Creek at that time, when it was still kind of the pandemic, people didn't have their reality of their lives drawing them, so people were able to focus on other issues, from Black Lives Matter to Ferry Creek, and kind of like look at things and put our foot down and be like, hey, this is an important thing that we all recognize and stand up for. And that, I feel like, was a really instrumental time for me to kind of be on the internet sharing, again, fact-based education about what makes old growth forests so unique, so special, why they're important, and then touching into kind of the economics on how exactly the logging industry operates, and finances and everything like that. So that was like a really great thing. And I've since kind of gone into more social issues and, again, politics, like I mentioned at the beginning. But it all kind of stems from this love for the outdoors, because, you know, like it's even funny for me to say like love for the outdoors as if it's some sort of thing that's other or outside of us. This whole, even the name to me is like a bit of a joke, nerdy about nature, because nature isn't this thing. Even the word nature implies that it is outside of the human realm. There's like everything human in the indoor space, and everything outside is nature that's like beyond humans. And really, that's such a fallacy, because at the core of everything I'm trying to do with this project is just realign people with the fact that we are a bunch of wild animals. We are all active parts of nature, not apart from nature. And in that, everything that I feel like I end up kind of talking about comes down to social issues, comes down to issues of equity and diversity, and making sure that we can create a society in which everybody's kind of taken care of when people's basic needs are met, so that we can focus on protecting the outdoors, the nature, like looking into actually, like, the idea of being a conservationist is such a privilege. It means that you have food on the table, that you're not worried about making rent, and I think that, like, basically this is a long-winded way of saying everything comes back to politics. So that's kind of like what fueled me into that little space. And then I'm really happy to be done with that, because that was exhausting. But now I'm just kind of back in the nerdy about nature space of things. We can go to the next slide here, Camille. And it's brought some really incredible feedback, and yeah, really incredible feedback. I've got messages from people all over the world who have like left their jobs and gone back to school for biology, or decided to like go volunteer at the nonprofit that they were interested in, or like, and it's just like, it's so heartwarming and like just inspiring to me. Like it in a very dark world where we see, and social media does a really good job of constantly reminding all of us all the time about how messed up and terrifying and horrible and awful the world is. It's really gratifying to hear these little slivers of inspiration where people have like gone on to pursue something they love, or that where they can feel they can make a difference in order to create a better world. So it's been, yeah, just like an incredibly gratifying project. I'm very happy with everything. And it's also led to some pretty interesting developments on a career side of things too. So not only do I run Nerdy About Nature just kind of as a passion project, it's like I don't have sponsors, I don't have government grants, I don't have I'm not in cahoots with any industry. Like, it's all supported by users. So that's like a really great thing. Like, I want it to be something for the people, by the people. And so I do that, and then I basically survive in society, as we all need to, by working at Redfish Restoration, which we can go to the next slide here. So this background in communications, and kind of love for deep ecology has kind of led me into an amazing opportunity to work for Redfish, which is a watershed restoration organization on the coast of Vancouver Island, based in Ucluelet. And we do a lot of really amazing work. The organization has been around for 29 years. Our 30th birthday is next year. And it basically started following the War in the Woods, which for those of you who are unaware, kind of like the Ferry Creek, the original Ferry Creek, just blockades in Clayoquot Sound, shut down logging. The industry was kind of halted, and redfish emerged initially as Central West Coast Forest Society as a way to put unemployed loggers back to work while also employing biologists and working with the nations to find ways to restore the rivers, which were so horribly damaged from logging. Um, and so we work in a variety of different ways. Going back to what I was mentioning at the beginning, the bioregion, the Columbia River watershed, we work in much smaller watersheds where it's basically from the tops of the peaks down to the waters and how that all influence or down to the bottoms of the rivers out to the estuary and how all these different things come into play uh, to create healthy watersheds for salmon, specifically for salmon. So if we go to the next slide. We start, up at the tops of these mountains. We do a lot of hill slope restoration. When logging occurred on these mountains, at the tops of these watersheds, the trees were cut, the roots die, the soils are no longer held together, in addition to a bunch of logging roads that were built pre-code. So there's just a bunch of landslides, and all that sediment finds its way down into the rivers and creeks down below, which smothers, fish habitat. It smothers reds. It does all sorts of things to the river channel itself. So we start up at the top by stabilizing these slopes, planting trees. In these photos here, we're building MBLs, which are modified brush layers, which work to kind of like act as steps in a way that collects debris as it starts to fall, and then also provides a place for us to plant trees like we have mostly alders, willows, and then we'll do like hemlock and spruce depending on where we are in the watershed. And all that kind of works to stabilize that hill slope. If we go to the next slide. We then move down to the forest. We've got an incredibly thick second growth forest. When all these forests here on Vancouver Island and mostly throughout the Cascadian bioregion were logged, it was before the era of trees being replanted, so it all kind of regenerated naturally from seed in the soil, and a lot of that is really thick hemlock. If we go to the next slide, I was hoping we could play a video here, but maybe I could just keep talking because I know we're kind of running late. And for those of you who don't follow Nerdy About Nature, like I have a bunch of videos that I do with redfish that also show up on this channel, kind of explaining some of these concepts. And right here we have a really good side by side of, on the left-hand side, you can see the control plot. So that's like one of those dense second growth hemlock forests that come up, really dense canopy, no light coming through the understory, very little diversity, a lot of stem flow, a lot of erosion, which means we're losing soil and it's silting up creeks. And then all we did was come through with a 30% thinning regime on the right side there. And 15 years later or 12 years later in this little plot, you can see we've got all sorts of diversity that has naturally sprung back. We've got standing dead snags, all these ferns, huckleberry, smaller saplings, hemlocks in the inner story. So we're developing a multi-layered canopy, which is ultimately going to create healthier hydrological function. If we go to the next slide. We then move down to riparian restoration. So again, a lot of these forests, this still in the upper right is this amazing, amazingly depressing still just right off the Kennedy River. If you're ever coming into Tofino, Ucluelet area, this is just right off the highway. And you can see we've got like this old legacy spruce standing there, this giant tree, and all around it is just the sea of alders because all of that forest around it was clear cut, logged, and extracted. So you can see, the height of what the canopy of the forest used to be. And again, all mature conifers, spruce, cedar, hemlock, amabilis fir. And then, that was logged. And now we have just like a bunch of deciduous trees, which are great. They're an amazing part of, forest succession in these riparian areas, mostly alder and big leaf maple. But we come in here and we work to we'll girdle these trees and help kind of like speed up that successional process of them kind of moving on while still, fixing nitrogen. And then we'll plant a lot of cedars and trees that we want to kind of see coming in the riparian zone after. And again, all this works to kind of stabilize the slopes of the banks, keep things from divulging into shallow, wide, fast flowing channels, which of course that means that there's very little habitat for fish. Just referencing this photo here, you can see the Kennedy River there. It's a really wide channel. really shallow water flowing through it. And like that is not how that river would have been historically. Historically, there would have been a lot of downed wood and logs in there that would have created complexities and deeper meandering kind of channels through there. But because we have this simplification of the forest on the banks, we then have simplification of the river channel, which brings us to the next slide, if you will. So then we do a lot of in-stream restoration as a result. So this is kind of complicated hydrological mapping. The shorthand of it is that the blue colors are slow water, the red colors are fast water. And so on the left, you can see we have that bend there, and the red indicates that a lot of water moves. These are both at 100-year flood events, like these water levels here based on topography. We can see that when that happens, you have a lot of water moving through the channel really fast, but there's not a lot of slow places, not a lot of slow water that's going to provide prime habitat for salmonids of all life stages to kind of hunker down and wait out these big rain events that we're seeing more frequently out here on the coast as a result of climate change. And then the one on the right, it's kind of tough to see here, but you can see we have the heat mapping or the kind of velocity mapping of the water, but then there's these little structures kind of dotting that main thing. Those are these log structures that we have planned on implementing, that act as kind of barriers. So they work to kind of slow down the water in spaces by creating back eddies and stuff behind them, which is going to sort and deposit sediments, scour out pools, create more riffles and just more complexity in that channel, which is going to aid in creating salmon habitat. And if we go to the next slide, you can see an example of that of what we ended up creating. So we end up having to source basically a bunch of second growth logs from elsewhere, usually donated or from found nearby as part of our like forest thinning operations in the riparian zone, trying to thin out those second growth hemlock forests. And we'll bring these logs in, ideally with root wads attached, and basically are stacking these logs to create a big log jam. It's all done with like engineering. We're not just out there like willy-nilly throwing logs into a river. This is something that like literally like this river here on Hilsicles or Tranquil in the Toloquate water and the Toloquate Nation watershed here. We've been planning like this structure that went onto that river last summer since 2017. So this is like a really long-term kind of thing. And again, one of the beautiful things that I love about redfish so much is that it was from its origins, it began as a way to bring loggers and First Nations people together to create jobs. And so all the work we do isn't just like in conjunction with the nations, but it's led and spearheaded by the nations. Like every bit of work we do goes to meet the nation's land stewardship goals. So it's what kind of trees do they want to have growing for cultural purposes, and what other kind of fish returns they want. Like they obviously want more salmon running. That's like a big food source and cultural source. So how do we work within this at this watershed level to meet these objectives as guided by the nations, and also recognizing that this isn't necessarily a quote unquote money maker in the kind of capitalist system we live in. It's really hard to find a clear line out of like, oh, this is how much money went into this work, and this is the dollar value created by the return of this one fish. It's like it's difficult to do that. But this is, I think, where it kind of comes into the kind of my conclusion, I guess, and what I would hope to kind of instill with people is just recognizing that, again, we are active parts of nature, like prior to Western colonization of these lands and the excessive clear-cut logging and degradation of these watersheds and overfishing and all the things that have kind of created the situations we live in, indigenous peoples have been working on these lands, since time immemorial, working as a part of them. And I think that is just like a really important thing that we tend to overlook. And in our own kind of Western arrogance, a lot of us come into these sort of situations like, oh, how can we do better? How can we, the royal quote unquote, we manage quote unquote these lands quote unquote in a better way to meet our goals? It's always like, how can we thin this forest so we can have more forest to log in 100 years? How can we thick this watershed so we can like have more fish to eat? And it's just like, it's such a myopic way of thinking. And I think at the core of it, um, we need to get back to this idea of recognizing that we are active parts of these ecosystems and that we have a role as stewards of these lands to steward them not only for the benefit of our communities and our people, but all the non-human people who share these lands with the bears, the birds, the fish, everything that's part of these ecosystems, because everything is wholly dependent on one another. one of the most striking things to me, and borderline heartbreaking things coming back from the redwoods, just speaking to my recent kind of mindset, and we can go to the final slide here if you want, Camille.
Okay.
Um, is, there's all this work happening in the States and all around the world, trying to kind of restore and rehabilitate these ecosystems and get fish running again. Fish is such a crucial part of all these watersheds here in the Pacific Northwest. But at the same time, there's like down in California a severe lack of megafauna like bears. There's all this amazing habitat in these conserved areas where you have like the potential for bear dens was amazing. And coming from Canada, where we have so many bears, but if anything, we're lacking enough habitat for bears because of ongoing old growth logging, to see the amount of habitat down there, but then the lack of bears because of, I don't know, just like a fear of bears that's been bred down there. So they've all been basically hunted out. They don't exist. It's like, how do we expect those nutrients from those fish that we're trying to support to come back into the forest to support a healthy forest, to support healthy habitat for those fish? If we don't have things like bears, like these are key pieces of this biological structure that if we lack that, like it's not ever going to come back the way that we hope it would unless we bring all of it back. And I think that kind of comes back to reckoning that, some of this change that we're presenting is going to be uncomfortable for people to get used to. And we're going to have to find ways to live alongside bears, black bears and grizzly bears, ideally, in order to kind of create a better future for, again, all of us human and non-human people uh, on these landscapes. That was my long-winded rant. I know we're over time. Sorry we got off to a late start. I would love to answer any questions now. Chat about that.
No, that was wonderful, Ross. I think we could listen to you talk for like another half hour easily, very easily. We just had one question come in through the chat, and there's just been some really great comments in there too. If anyone hasn't
Mm.
been watching the chat, I definitely advise doing a little read through, some amazing resources there. So this one is from Francis, joining from Toronto. Currently working at the Sustainable Capacity Solutions and Sea Change Canada. Francis does a lot of social media content creation and was wondering if you had any tips for growing your following. We post 1 to 2 times a week, but have plateaued in our followers over the past few months.
Um, Yeah, I mean that's an interesting one. I struggle with this too. To be honest, the algorithm is something that I have never understood, and I don't know if I ever will be able to. I think the best thing is just consistency and trying to maybe find partners who are in similar fields and would like to maybe share and collaborate with you on those posts. Um, yeah, I mean, I have kind of tried to, like, one of the things that I noticed that I was doing maybe a year or two ago is there's so much to talk about. I felt like I was almost cannibalizing my own work, where I would be putting out so much stuff that by the time a video was starting to ramp up, I would already be putting another video out, and it just kind of, I think it bogged the algorithm down in a way. But I think, the biggest thing is just consistency. Find times of days that work for you. Find subjects that you are obviously passionate about and knowledgeable about, and then just maybe try to work with different collaborators and people to kind of spread those messages further. I know, at the beginning, I relied a lot on just like the friends and networks that I had made within the outdoor sports community, specifically those at Protect Our Winters at POW, to kind of like share stuff at the beginning, especially talking about broader, issues related to climate change and whatnot. So yeah, I hope that helps. I don't know. That feels like not the best answer. Sorry, Francis.
No, I think that's great. I think it's the moral of the story is it takes time and it takes trial and error and finding out what works. I think that's good advice.
Hmm.
Um, So a question came in that's in a direct message. So how can young people slash students get involved in their local communities to make a tangible impact in the world that sometimes feels like it is against us?
Yeah, I know it's so hard. I think community is everything. And then that's like, local communities is the great place to start, but I mean, even bigger communities working on regional scales. Um, people often will send me messages about like, oh, like how do you stay so positive? And the short answer is that I don't. Like I'm a human. I have highs and lows and ups and downs like all of us. But the thing that always brings me out of those moments is community, is finding like-minded people, whether or not it's in person, like a lot of my community, actually, I wouldn't even say is my physical community because Euclid is a small town and I have, friends there, but like it's like some of the most inspiring people I know live all across the province and down in the States. And like I connect with them, maybe for a phone call or a FaceTime, or maybe see them like once every 2 years at some sort of random event that brings us together. But seeing the work that they're doing and then having those conversations when they come into play, like I think that is to me the most inspiring thing and uh the thing that keeps me going. I think it's this notion of I've received a lot of praise on the internet, and it's like, okay, that's all great and grand, and I'm so glad and appreciative that people are enjoying what I'm doing, but I'm still just one person playing my role here. And like this, I feel like I've found my kind of role to play, but every one of us, everyone on this chat, everyone who follows, like everybody in the world has a role to play that is no more important than anyone else. And I think it's really important to recognize that if you're focusing on doing anything, as big or small as you think it may be, it is working to a better future. It is doing the right thing. You're like, we're all part of this whole big old mess of a world that we live in together. And the only way we're going to get out of it is, or like get through it is by working together. And that takes skill sets and passions from a wide variety of places. And I think it's just important we all keep moving forward in whatever way we feel like we're making a difference, whether or not we can actually see it happening in real time or not.
Mhm. I love that, Ross. That's a great answer. It's all about that ripple effect, right?
Hmm.
Um, we have time for, I think, one more question. This is from Sherry. We want to bring back Arctic grayling, which, for those who don't know, is an incredible fish. It's in the salmon family. How difficult is it to reestablish fish and their ecosystems? As much as possible, is it for us to have access to the research and find our advocates when it might not be possible? So, how difficult is it to, yeah, work in fish restoration, accessing research and finding advocates?
Um, where exactly are you there, Sherry, in the world? I mean, reestablishing fish populations, from my knowledge, can be pretty difficult just because of the genetic variability and the loss that you face when you're trying to reestablish populations. I think one of the things that makes the work that we do at Redfish so like so amazing, is the fact that we are lucky enough that we do have populations of wild fish, although there's debate about how wild they are because of hatchery stray and whatnot. But we have seen an incredible return, I guess, from just the work we've done in restoration. I think creating habitat, it's kind of the old like field of dreams, if you build it, they will come thing. Like so many of our watersheds have been simplified to the point where it's been like that for so long that we don't even have a baseline of what it is to go back to. And there are a lot of amazing resources online in your specific region that you can find that I'm sure will help you kind of like guide you towards the type of watershed or the type of structures and things that would have been historically part of that watershed. And I think there's a lot of research out there that kind of shows us how to work to get this stuff back. But I think if there's any inkling of a population in that river that you've got, if you focus on, creating safe places for them to nest, like good gravels for building reds, habitat cover, and then just some sort of variability in the channel complexity that allows them to have deep pools, to just basically hunker down. I'm not exactly sure what the climate projections are for you in northern Alberta. I'm assuming it's going to be a lot drier. I'm assuming you're kind of in either a nival system up there or maybe more of a glacial one, probably more glacial. So the flows are going to be changing, probably going to be running a lot drier in the falls and through the winters. So if there's ways you can create that complexity in the habitat in order to create that kind of buffer zone that allows fish to survive these climate-induced kind of events, that I think is going to be the most effective thing. Um, Like even in creating some of the log structures we created on Hilsicles, like within the first year, we had, I think it was like 7,000 chum come back, and they were all resting in the one pool we had created because there was nowhere else to go on the river. And prior to that, like if we hadn't created that pool, those fish wouldn't have been there. And then this recent summer, we went ahead and I think we installed 11 or 12 more structures on the summer. It was a big summer for us. But now, like with this recent run of the chums, like every single pool was full of fish. I don't know if we have final numbers on how many, like, I don't know if we've done the final counts or have calculated that, but every single pool that we had created literally a month before, 2 months before, was stocked full of fish. And it's so inspiring to see these fish come back if you just give them a little bit of what they desire, a little bit of what they need. So, yeah.